Alright, so let's see how to recreate this overlay transition using FullPageJS and Elementor. As far as the integration of FullPageJS goes, there's already tutorials out there, so I'm not gonna rehash the same things, but you can basically either use the Elementor plugin, which would be the easiest way, or you can integrate the library directly. So when you go with the library integration route, you basically can do it one of two ways. And first one is you basically have all your sections within the same page, and then you use an HTML widget to include the dependencies and then to initialize FullPageJS. And in the initialization part, you essentially reference an existing Elementor wrapper class, and then using one of the options, you would reference a custom CSS class that you add to each of the sections. The other way is to have each section as a template and then use an HTML widget to recreate the structure that's FullPageJS expects you to have, and just inputs within each div, you would input the shortcode of the template. I don't like working with the HTML widget when there's a lot of code, so we are gonna be doing it in this fashion as well. But in any case, there are already tutorials out there that will probably explain it better than I will. So let's just get to the part that interests us, and that's the transition effect. Let's see. So I already have created few sections as templates, and the only requirements at the section level is to basically have heights of fit to screen or 100 VH, whatever works for you. So if I go to my sample page, I'm just gonna delete these. So the first thing I want to do is I want to make sure that I include these sections in my page. So I'm just gonna grab an HTML widget. I need to make sure that you give it a full width if that's what you're going for, and you need to get rid of the default padding at the column level. And so now what we're gonna do is basically at the on the full page GitHub page, there is a sample of the structure that it expects you to have. So you can just copy that. In this case, I'm gonna leave the ID as it is. For the class selector, by default, FullPageJS looks for section, but in our case, we're gonna call it FS section. So I'm just gonna change this to FS section. We only have 3 sections, so we're gonna delete the 4th one. And then you just need to grab the shortcodes that you have and insert them where it says some section. So I think it was 49 and then 52. Okay, so now we should be able, when we preview the page, we should see all 3 sections, as you can see. So let's go and try to integrate FullPageJS. You can of course do it within the same div or within the same HTML widget or another HTML widget, but like I said, I don't like working with the HTML widget when there's too much code. So instead, I'm going to use a snippet manager or a code manager. I'm using Woody snippets, but you can, use whatever you like. So first requirement to integrate the library is to include some dependencies, so we are going to grab those from the CDN, and you have the link in the GitHub page. Otherwise, you can just Google FullPageJS CDN and it should come out. So we grab the CSS, and now we're gonna grab the JS. Okay, and we already included the HTML structure, so all that's left now is to initialize FullPageJS and reference the class selector that we gave. So I'm gonna put this in a script tag. So yeah, I'm probably going a bit fast in certain instances, but since this is a video, you can just look it up again. So just to be safe, I'm gonna put everything in a load event. So basically make sure that the documents has been loaded before we do anything else with FullPageJS. And so I don't need these options. What we do need though is the section selector option. Like I said, by default it looks for the class section, but we call that FS section. So I'm just gonna copy that and paste it here and give it the correct class. So in theory, this should basically be it, and FullPageJS should be working right now. Now there's a lot more options, like an immense amounts of options with FullPageJS, so that you can do a lot of things. But for now, we just want to see the integration working, and it is. So now that we have FullPageJS integrated, we can work on the overlay transition that you saw before. So when I was looking at doing this, I basically was just looking for some way to delay the scroll, and I ended up finding a fiddle by the actually by the developer of FullPageJS, which already shows an example of how to do it. In this case, it basically moves this heading before scrolling down to the next section. But essentially using the same technique, we can do any type of animation that we want or transition that we want. So I'm going to be copy pasting code from the Visual Studio, from the example that I showed earlier, and then I will try to explain what is happening. So let me just set things up. Let's see. Yep, and this, and almost there. Okay. So, いいよ、ボボ。大丈夫。Yeah, sorry about that. Okay, so since we're doing an overlay transition, we need something to represent that overlay. In this case, we're representing it using a single div. We then want to give it some default styling. Depending on the animation that you're trying to do, it might be different. But in our case, we want it to be fixed position. We want it to start at the left top of the screen, and then we want to give it 100 width, and by default we want it to be 0 height because that is what we're gonna try to animate together. And then we just give it a color of our choosing and a Z index that is relatively high so that it's on top of everything else. For the JS part, we basically what we try to do in the initialization part is using what is called a callback function. This onLeave callback function, which gets triggered every time there is a scroll. We just hook into it and then we kind of delay the scroll for a predetermined number of seconds, whatever our animation, how long it may be, and we run the code to do the animation. So let's see, I need to clean up the code a little bit because in the Visual Studio I was doing things a bit different. I don't need this. We only have 3 sections. We want to target our custom selector. So section selector .fs section. Let's see. Yeah. So in my example, I'm using GSAP, but you don't have to use GSAP. You could use CSS and whatever JS library you like. Probably gonna do a CSS example too, just so that you get the idea. And since I'm using GSAP, I need to include dependency for GSAP as well. Again, I'm probably going relatively too fast, but you can always just go back in the video. So GSAP, we're just gonna grab this and copy it over. So unless I made a mistake somewhere or missed something, this should basically work. And then we're gonna do a couple more examples so that you can understand more clearly the code and which parts of the code you should be worrying about in your implementation. So I just refreshed the page. I can see the navigation, so at least FPJS is working. And then if I scroll, we have our overlay working. Okay, so let's see. How should I explain this? So for the animation part, if you're trying to do some overlay transition, in this case, you're gonna have a couple of things to worry about. One, you need to decide how you want to implement your transition. So it could be using the same technique, GSAP or another library or CSS. So your animation is going to run at a certain amount of time, and here you have a constant called transition time. And so this transition time constant has to be let's see, at least it needs to be at a minimum the amount of time, the duration that it takes to show your overlay. So if we look at the code here, we see that basically I am showing the overlay in 0.4 seconds, so 400 milliseconds. I am basically animating the height. By default, it's 0, and we tell it to go to 100 within 400 milliseconds. And then on the height overlay section, uh, we we basically change from top 0 to top 100 within again 400 milliseconds. So the whole both animations take 800 milliseconds, and that's what I put in here. So using the exact amounts of time it takes your whole animation to process will basically give you a relatively smooth feel when you look at the animation. If you do anything less than 400 in this example, since the show overlay takes 400 milliseconds, if we do something like 300 milliseconds, for example, you are going to see that we can see the sections basically changing before the overlay completely is completely shown. So if I refresh and try to do this, you see, you can see at the bottom, just concentrates at the bottom here, you will see that it turns to another color. So it changed the section before the overlay was completely shown, was fully shown. So at a minimum, you want it to be the amount of time that it's going to take for the overlay to show. But really, you should give it some plus buffer. So in our case, it takes 400. We probably want to give it a couple of milliseconds more, a couple of hundred milliseconds more. Or the best would be to give it the whole duration of the animation. So you see here, the second part is kind of fast for my taste. It's not as smooth with 600, with 400. So if we do 600, it's a bit better, but it still kind of feels fast. So you basically just experience all you wanna, what you wanna keep in mind is it should never be less than the time it would take you to show your overlay, and then on the other hand, it can be, you know, whatever you want it to be. Say you want it to be feel a lot more slower, so even though our whole animation takes 800 milliseconds, we want the whole transition time, on the other hand, to take 1200 milliseconds. So this is something that you might want to do if, say, you have an overlay in which you generate some random codes using JavaScript. So you want the overlay to show for a period of time before it goes to the next section. It disappears and goes to the next section. So here you'd have text showing up or something like that. Maybe you want it to take a lot more, and so you just basically just change this variable here, this constant, sorry. Okay, so as far as the transition itself, you can basically, you're free to do whatever you want. In this case, we're doing just an overlay, showing it and hiding it top to bottom, and then again from top to bottom. But we can of course change directions. So let's say we want it to be, to kind of like swipe, so it goes from the top to the bottom, and then on the second part back from the bottom to the top. In this case, the show overlay, if we keep the GSAP example, the show overlay would stay the same. And in the hide overlay part, instead of going from top 0 to 100, we would just take the height back to 0. And here before we were resetting the properties, but we don't need it in this example. So with just that change there, now the animation would be different. So you see now it goes back up instead of going down when it hides. We can again, instead of doing the height, we can do the width instead. So in our default sign-in, we would change the width to 0, give it a height of 100, and then instead of the height, we would change the width. So when we show the overlay, we go from width 100, and then um, with 0. So if I update and refresh, now it should go from here to here and back. Did I refresh? Yeah, okay. So there you go. And like I said, in the example I'm using GSAP, but we could just use pure CSS transitions or CSS keyframe animations, depending on what your properties you're working with and what you're trying to do. So the same example, if we want to rewrite it in CSS, and for something as simple as this, I would not personally would not use GSAP, but unless I already use GSAP in that site in the sites I'm working on. But we could let's see, if we want to redo the same thing, we could basically um, mm, so we will not use GSAT. Well, I could leave it, really, it doesn't matter. I do want to temporarily comment this out since we're not using it. Same thing for the height part. And so let's see, if we're gonna use CSS, in this case, we're just gonna use simple transition, because working with single property in a linear fashion, I don't need any complex keyframe uh, animation for this. So I would just give it the same thing. We want it to take 400 milliseconds, so we give it 0.4. And then I would just say um, when the div, we gave the div the IDFP overlay, has a class called show. Uh, which one were we doing last? The width? Yeah. Take the width to 100%. And so in the initialization part, in order to run that animation, all we need to do is basically add the show class that we define to the overlay, and then in the height part we just remove it. So it'll be something like, of course you can create a variable to store, you actually would want to, since it's going to be the same thing. But in this case, just gonna copy paste. So you just do something like fp overlay, and then that's classless dot add, and the name of your class. And in the hide part, we just remove that class that we added. So instead of dot add, you would do dot remove. And this basically should do the same type of animation that we just had. So if we try to refresh the page, that was too fast. And why is it so fast? I did a typo somewhere. So transition easy and out. I have the additional character there. So there you go. And it's basically the same thing as what we had before, just done differently. So basically this blueprint is not dependent on any type of animation library or just one way of doing it. You can do whatever you want. And you're not limited, like I said, to just doing simple stuff like a single overlay. You can have um, multiple overlays, so you could maybe have two divs that each take 50%, and one go from the top to the bottom, and the other one goes from the left to the right. You could have a canvas element and do some 2D or 3D drawings if you like. You can have a canvas and do some, I don't know, 3GS. Basically, it can be whatever you want it to be. It would depend on your coding, and the technique is gonna be the same thing. Now, one thing I wanted to mention with FullPageJS is, let's see, if I go to one of the sections, let's say section 2, and I try to use a motion effect with the heading, so something that pops, so say bounce, and give it a overlay, a delay of 400 or 500. Doesn't really matter, just want to be able to have some time between the transition. So if I refresh the page and go to section 2, it will never show. And the reason is, by default, FullPageJS completely disables the scroll bar function. You can see it's invisible here, but since it's completely disabled, Elementor never gets the triggers that the element is within the viewport, so it never runs the animation code. So for this, what you need to do is a couple of things. In your initialization code, you want to use an option called scroll bar, I think. By default, it has a value of false, and you want to give it a value of true. Um, so I just update, and if I go to the page and refresh, I don't see why don't I see it? Scroll bar equal true. Is it scroll bar? I forgot. Let's see, refresh. I still don't see it. So let's go to the GitHub and make sure we have the right name. Scroll bar. No, 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 no. Wait, so scroll bar, and yeah, I'm sorry. Since it's a boolean value, it doesn't need to be within quotes. I put it as if it was a string, so we just need to give it the value of true. And now, if we go and refresh the page, we should see the scroll bars. Yeah, I don't see them because I already have the CSS to hide it, which is the other parts I wanted to show you. So when you do the scroll bar, yeah, let me get rid of that, otherwise it will not be clear enough. When you use the option of scroll bar true, it basically will show you the scroll bars, as you can see here. You still have the scrolling function, and the motion effect will work, but you probably want to hide the scroll bars, and that's what this piece of CSS code does. This will basically just hide the scroll bar in most recent browsers, but it will keep the underlying functionality in place. So Elementor will know that the element is within the viewport, and your animation will run as expected. So yeah, I don't have much time, otherwise we could have done another animation just to yeah, let's try to do it real quick, just so that you can see that you're not limited to like a single div or whatever. So if I do something like I'm gonna try to do this quickly, but if I do a couple of divs, for example, and right overlay, so I want to have two overlays. I'm gonna give them some default styling. Um, let's see. So I want them both to be fixed. I want them both to start at the top, and I want them both to have a Z index. And instead of CSS, we're gonna reuse again GSAP. So I will get rid of that and get rid of this. And then for the left overlay, I want it to be at left 0. So what I'm trying to do is have two overlays split vertically, and the left overlay will go from the top to the bottom. The right overlay will go from the middle of the screen to the all the way to the right most of the screen, and then it would just reverse the animation. So in this case, I will want to let's see. I need this to have a width of 50% and the heights of 0. So we are going to animate the heights for the left overlay, and the background color of I don't know, it doesn't really matter, just gonna say black. And then for the right overlay, let's see. So the race overlay, I want it to be at left 50% because I want it to start in the middle of the screen. I want to animate the width, so the width is going to be 0, and then the height is going to be 100%. And the background color, we're going to say pink. Why not? Okay, so like I said, we are going to reuse GSAP, so I'm gonna uncomment what we had before and get rid of the class CSS class addition removal code. So for this, we want to target, since we changed the overlays to have classes instead of IDs, we're gonna change this to we're going to start with the left overlay, and we want to give a height of 100. So height of 100. We want the next we want the right overlay to have a width of 50%. And let's see. Next, when we hide the overlay, we basically just want to reverse it. So I'm just going to copy paste. Instead of with 50 for the right one, we want 0. And for the left one, we want the height to go back to 0. Now, the whole thing will basically, it's 400 times 2, so 1600. It doesn't have to be, like I said earlier, the animation doesn't, duration, it doesn't have to be, transition time doesn't have to be as long as the animation. You can make it as long as the animation or more. You should never do it less than the amount of time it takes to show the overlay when we run it. And if we want to change it, we can just change the value again. Okay, so we refresh the page. I am not seeing anything, meaning I have some problem somewhere. So left overlay, right overlay, left, right, protrudes, and right overlay, left overlay. No, that's weird. Where did I go wrong? Anybody see where I went wrong? Let's refresh again and look at the code. I don't see any error. Oh. Interesting. And left 0, height 0, background we have set index. I can see in the code, I can see that it's changing. It's changing the left and right values, and the reason why I don't see them, I don't know. Let's think about this for a second. Oh, that's very interesting. I have no idea why. Let's see, there is no errors with the JS part. So I'm guessing my error is in the CSS, and I simply did not do a semicolon. Stupid me. Sorry about that. Wasted a couple minutes of everybody's time. I apologize. And there we go. So that's how easy you could, do whatever you want with your animations. Okay, that's pretty much all I wanted to cover. Sorry if it's too fast, not explained well enough and whatnot. Kind of my first time doing this. So I will upload the code somewhere so that you guys can look it up and see the code for yourself, copy it, change it. The whole code is documented, and hopefully between that documentation, or comments rather, between the comments in the code and this video, you should be able to implement your own overlay transitions. I look forward to see some of the examples that you guys make. All right, so thank you very much, and talk to you soon. Bye.